You ever see a woman who looks like she is in the room, but it's like her spirit has already left? I suppose if you watched closely enough across enough years, you would begin to recognize it. The way she stands still yet braced, like some rare porcelain relic placed on display solely to be looked past, not looked at. And if what I'm about to tell you ever made you feel like no one deserved to be defined by a single rumor more than a single truth, then like and subscribe if you agree, because this is exactly that kind of story, the kind of slow, cruel societal strangulation that didn't begin, it accumulated. For years she stood alone at every ball, but this is how she became that ghost of herself long before the Duke ever called her name in silence. Lady Corinne Castlemere didn't always make the chandeliers feel colder just by existing in the dead zones of light. No, she once made entire parlors ignite when she was younger, because she was striking, but not in the normal, look at behind the bell, way London worshipped. She had the kind of beauty that was sharpened from thought, intellect, observation, that quiet kind of power that unsettles people who spent their entire lives playing social theater but have never developed an actual inner world of their own. And that was precisely why they destroyed her. There was a rumor, whispered, small, then found like a spark across dry paper until it became the only identity she possessed, that she had ruined the Viscount of Halbridge's eldest son 12 years ago by publicly humiliating him when he tried to propose to her at the end of a season. Except she never accepted him privately, she never encouraged him, she never offered him anything but polite distance, but she said no in the one domain where brutal men cannot accept refusal, privately. And so he twisted the narrative before she could speak. Said she strung him along. Said she ruined his prospects. Said she made a fool of him. One rumor from a powerful enough voice can destroy 10,000 truths in this world, and it did. Invitations still came to her, because attendance of balls in her station was obligatory, but eye contact evaporated. Mothers told daughters not to stand too close. Gentlemen learned to pretend she wasn't there. The orchestra in every ballroom continued playing waltzes as if her name didn't exist. And yet she still stood at every ball. Every season. Every year. Why? Because the most excruciating part about survival in high society wasn't what they did to you, it was how they demanded you perform like it never hurt. Corinne was 36 now, far past the ephemeral novelty age London worshipped, yet she was forced to keep attending these glittering cages because her brother was a diplomat who needed the Castlemere name seen. And so she stood, by columns, window alcoves, and the balconies, near pianofortes, beside gilded doors, always near but never within. Her gowns were always tasteful, refined, almost surgical in their quiet dignity, deep navy, charcoal lavender, moss green, colors meant to not provoke additional cruelty. She no longer came to hope. She came to endure. Her eyes, though, there was something in them that no degradation managed to put out, a strange, almost tragic stubbornness to keep existing on her own terms even if existence meant being invisible. Winter, spring, summer, autumn, years laid like sediment in river rock, and London became accustomed to the idea that Lady Corinne Castlemere would always be at every ball like stained glass in a cathedral, structurally there, aesthetically pleasing enough to not remove, but of no practical use. And nobody ever asked what that must do to a woman internally, to be the exhibit of loss without having committed any crime deserving of it. And I know the horror of this is not in some violent strike, but in the slow erosion of the soul through relentless social starvation. You must understand that before you understand anything else. This wasn't a story of heartbreak. This was a story of erasure. And the wicked part? She accepted her invisibility like it was currency she owed society for daring to have boundaries in her youth. That is what made the day everything changed so catastrophic. Because when the Duke eventually calls her name, it won't be a rescue, it will be a revelation that exposes how everyone else always lied. But this is the world she was in before that fracture in reality ever happened. This cold, polished, unforgiving ballroom world that demanded she stand in silence, until a man powerful enough to break the entire mythology with a single word, would finally speak it. The Duke of Evermere returned to London without an invitation, without warning, without the typical season announcements that mothers and daughters salivated over like wolves starved for title and bloodline. He returned like a storm does, unannounced and already in motion before anyone has time to realize they should fear what it will undo. Benedict Ashford, 39, tall, austere, unreadable, the man no one could manipulate, not by wealth, not by tears, not by desperation, not even by threat of lineage extinction. And when he entered Lady Renford's spring ball that night, it wasn't thunder that struck the room silent, it was recognition, because every man knew they could not steer him and every woman knew their rehearsed flirtation scripts never worked on him anyway. But what they didn't know, what nobody expected, was that his gaze did not sweep the debutantes, or the newest French silk gowns, or the fresh crop of perfect 20-year-old daughters whose mothers had been practically waiting 7 years for him to re-enter the game. No, his gaze went lower, deeper, older, and halted with surgical stillness on the woman no one had looked at in public with meaning in over a decade, Lady Corinne Castlemere. People pretended not to see it, but silence has a sound when fear is struck clean through a ballroom. They felt something shifting that was not supposed to shift. An axis realigning. A hierarchy glitching. It was as if the air suddenly recognized a forbidden variable. Because the Duke didn't blink. He didn't fidget. He didn't politely acknowledge and move on like every other gentleman had learned to do regarding Corinne. He held her in place with his eyes like she wasn't the ghost in the corner, like she was the only actual anchor point in the entire room. Corinne had no idea what to do. She had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at. Her spine instinctively prepared for impact, because in her world, attention was always followed by destruction. But this attention wasn't predatory, it wasn't mocking, it wasn't pity, it was deliberate assessment, like he already knew something about her that the rest of London had chosen to erase. And that is why everyone panicked internally. Because power recognizes truth with frightening accuracy, and Benedict Ashford was power in pure form. He paused at the top of the marble steps, the orchestra faltered as if they too were stunned, and then he descended, one measured stride at a time, and mothers literally froze mid-whisper because they couldn't calculate strategy fast enough to intercept or redirect him. He walked directly through the center corridor between chandeliers and floral arrangements and gossip predators like it was a battlefield and he didn't need a shield, because his certainty was already the weapon. Corinne still did not move. She stood there near the far right pillar, the exact same place she always positioned herself, the safe plane of invisibility. He crossed it, stopped in front of her, and did not speak the way society expected dukes to speak. He did not perform charm. He did not introduce himself to the room first. He simply said her name, softly, precisely, like he was not calling her to dance, but calling her back to existence. Lady Corinne Castlemere. And the shock was so violent across the whole that you could almost feel the moment London lost control of the narrative it had written for her. Corinne blinked because she thought her mind was hallucinating. But he had not mistaken her for anyone else, he had chosen her with intention. She hadn't been chosen in years. He extended his hand without explaining why, without flattery, without apology. Not like a man offering charity, but like a man offering equality. No one spoke but everyone heard that moment. The orchestra, trying to salvage normalcy, began a waltz again, but the ballroom was not normal anymore. Because one truth had now been witnessed, the Duke no one could pressure or steer, had acknowledged. The one woman society had erased. And everyone in that room, even the cruelest women who used to sharpen their tongues on Corinne's back, understood instantly that if the Duke of Evermere chose to direct his power at her, the entire architecture of their social world was now at risk of collapse. The world thinks power announces itself loudly, But the most terrifying power in London was about to reveal itself, not with trumpet, not with proclamation, not even with confrontation, but with disclosure. Because what no one knew, not Corinne, not society, not the women who weaponized rumor as sport, was that Benedict Ashford knew the truth of that old scandal 12 years ago, long before he ever walked back into London this season. He had investigated Halbridge's son back then for a completely separate matter: embezzlement, blackmail, coercion. The man was a predator in private, with multiple destroyed women behind him, and Corinne had been the first woman to refuse him before he evolved fully into the monster he later became publicly. Benedict knew this. He read her letters. He saw the timeline. He saw how she refused him with complete integrity. And then he saw how society crucified her to protect a man who ended up destroying others. He had kept that truth locked away because it wasn't his battle then. But it became his battle the moment he met her eyes that night at Renford's ball, because he finally saw the living casualty of the lie he buried inside a file drawer and walked away from all those years ago. That was why he didn't hesitate. That was why he walked straight through the ballroom without adjusting his pace. That was why he said her name like a man calling someone back from a grave he helped dig by silence. And the next day, when the ton finally erupted with questions and panic and whispering hysteria, Benedict Ashford didn't hide in his townhouse. He sent letters. Not threats. Not insinuations. Evidence. To the 3 most influential women in London who weaponized Corinne's name for sport. He didn't just clear Corinne's name, he inverted the power structure entirely. Because suddenly the rumor wasn't her shame anymore, it was proof of what London refused to see, that Corinne Castlemere had been right first. And when she stood at the next ball, she no longer stood like the ghost by the wall, she stood centered, not by performance, not by force, but because the Duke's presence beside her made every predator lose their teeth. He didn't just choose her socially. He chose her publicly in the one realm where men like him never gamble: credibility. A woman who endured invisibility for 12 years now held a kind of windstorm beneath her feet that no one could intercept, because she didn't earn her redemption by being chosen romantically. She earned it by being the only person who refused to bow to corruption when she was still young enough to be terrified. And the most devastating part of all? When Benedict finally proposed to her weeks later, it wasn't a dramatic spectacle, it wasn't in front of society, it was in quiet privacy, with the gentleness of a man making amends to fate itself. And Corinne didn't cry because of a ring, or a title, or a future. She cried because for the first time in her entire life, she wasn't being punished for choosing herself. That is the real ending of this story, not that she became Duchess Evermere, but that she became visible again, to the only person whose judgment actually mattered, her own.